The rain hammered against the rusted metal of the abandoned military outpost like bullets from heaven. In the dim emergency lighting, something moved in the corner of the medical bay. It wasn't human. Zixtal had been lying there for 3 standard rotations now, his breathing shallow and labored. The Catherian warhound was massive even by his species standards, standing nearly 4 feet at the shoulder when healthy. His fur, once a brilliant silver that could shift colors for camouflage, was now matted with dried blood and mud. Multiple plasma burns decorated his flanks, and his left rear leg hung at an unnatural angle. The evacuation had been swift and merciless. When the hegemony forces broke through the outer defenses of Kepler 442b, the Galactic Coalition forces had exactly 47 minutes to extract what they could. Priority 1 was personnel. Priority 2 was classified intel. Priority 3 was equipment. Warhounds apparently didn't make the list. Zixtal remembered the chaos, the screaming of wounded soldiers, the whine of transport engines spinning up, the acrid smell of ozone from overloaded shield generators. His handler, Lieutenant Vexmiran, had been loading him into a medical transport when the shrapnel from an exploding ammunition depot had torn through the bay. Vexmiran had died instantly. In the confusion that followed, no one had noticed one injured warhound left behind. The humans had arrived 6 hours ago. Zixtal had heard their strange, flat voices echoing through the corridors as they swept the facility. He'd tried to move, to call out, but his translator implant had been damaged in the fighting. All that emerged from his throat was a low, rumbling whine that probably sounded more threatening than pleading to alien ears. Now he could hear them getting closer, heavy boots on metal flooring, the electronic chirp of their scanning equipment, voices speaking in their rapid, choppy language. Zixtal had learned enough about humans during the war to know they were efficient soldiers, but utterly ruthless when it came to eliminating threats. A wounded alien war beast would undoubtedly qualify as a threat to be eliminated. The footsteps stopped outside the medical bay. Zixtal tried to lift his head but managed only to open his eyes. Through the doorway stepped 3 humans in combat gear, weapons ready. The lead human was tall and lean, with dark skin and alert eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. The nameplate on her armor read Martinez. She raised her hand, stopping her companions, and approached slowly. Zixtal tensed, expecting the killing blow, but instead she knelt just outside his reach and began speaking in soft, measured tones. He couldn't understand the words, but there was something in her voice that wasn't threatening. Curious, perhaps. Even concerned. The second human, younger with pale skin and nervous energy, pointed his weapon at Zixtal and said something sharp and urgent. Martinez held up her hand again, never taking her eyes off the wounded warhound. The third human, older with graying hair and multiple scars, moved to a terminal and began typing rapidly. Zixtal watched as strange symbols appeared on the screen. Then, to his amazement, the device began speaking in accented but understandable galactic standard. The older human had activated some kind of translation protocol. "Can you understand us?" Martinez asked, her voice now coming through clearly. Zixtal managed a weak nod. The effort sent spikes of pain through his damaged spine, but he held her gaze. "Good. I'm Sergeant Martinez, Colonial Marines. This is Corporal Zhang and Tech Specialist Rodriguez. We're here to assess this facility for salvage operations." She paused, studying his wounds with what looked like professional interest. "Looks like somebody left you behind." The younger human, Zhang, shifted impatiently. "Sarge, we should just put it out of its misery and move on. Command wants this sweep finished in 4 hours. It's not an it, Corporal. This is a Catherian warhound. They're sentient." Martinez never looked away from Zixtal as she spoke. "Aren't you?" Zixtal tried to speak but could only manage a rasping sound. His throat was too dry, his injuries too severe. Rodriguez, the tech specialist, moved closer with his scanner. Multiple fractures, severe dehydration, plasma burns, possible internal bleeding. Even if we could get him to a medical facility, the chances would be slim. "But there's a chance?" Martinez asked. "Theoretically, yes. But Sarge, we don't have authorization to extract alien combatants. Hell, we don't even have the proper medical supplies for his species." Zhang stepped forward, weapon still trained on Zixtal, and we don't know if it's still hostile. These things were bred for war. It could rip us apart if it wanted to. Martinez finally looked away from Zixtal, fixing Zhang with a stare that could have melted steel. "Corporal, when was the last time you saw a hostile combatant lying helpless on a medical table, slowly dying of dehydration?" "That's not the point, Sarge. Orders are orders." Orders are to secure the facility and assess salvage potential. Nothing in our orders says we can't provide medical aid to wounded personnel. It's not personnel, it's what, Zhang? Not human? Martinez's voice carried a dangerous edge. Since when do colonial marines decide who lives and dies based on species? Rodriguez cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sarge, even if we wanted to help, we don't have the resources. Our med kit is designed for humans. We don't know the first thing about Catherian physiology. Martinez was quiet for a long moment, still looking at Zixtal. The warhound could see something working behind her eyes, some kind of calculation taking place. Rodriguez, can you access the facility's medical database? Should be able to. Why? See if there are any files on warhound medical care. Zhang, inventory our supplies and see what we can adapt. Zhang lowered his weapon slightly. Sarge, you're not seriously thinking. I'm thinking that we took an oath to protect and serve. And last I checked, that didn't come with a species restriction. Martinez moved closer to Zixtal, close enough that he could have snapped her neck with one movement if he'd had the strength. Instead, she gently touched his head, her fingers finding the soft spot behind his ears that all Catherians found soothing. My name's Elena, she said softly. What's yours? Zixtal summoned every bit of strength he had left. Zixtal, he managed to whisper. Elena smiled, the first genuine expression of warmth he'd seen in days. Well, Zixtal, looks like you're stuck with us for a while. The next several hours blurred together in a haze of pain and unexpected kindness. Zixtal drifted in and out of consciousness as the humans worked around him with an efficiency that surprised him. He'd fought alongside many species during the war, but none had shown the adaptability he was witnessing now. Rodriguez had managed to crack the facility's medical database and was rapidly cross-referencing Catherian physiology with their human medical supplies. His fingers flew over the holographic interface as he muttered a constant stream of observations and calculations. Okay, their blood is copper-based, not iron, so standard human coagulants won't work, but they process oxygen similarly to us, so the emergency respirator should function. Their bone density is roughly 3 times human normal, which explains why these fractures haven't completely shattered. He paused, highlighting something on the screen. This is interesting. Says here they have redundant cardiovascular systems. That's probably why he's still alive with this much blood loss. Zhang had set up a perimeter around the medical bay and was monitoring the facility's security feeds. Every few minutes he'd glance over at Zixtal with an expression caught somewhere between suspicion and curiosity. Elena, meanwhile, had taken charge of the immediate medical care with the calm competence of someone who'd done field medicine before. She'd found emergency IV supplies in the facility's stores and was carefully inserting a fluid line into Zixtal's forelimb. Her touch was gentle but confident, and she kept up a steady stream of reassuring words. The database says your people need about twice the fluid intake that humans do, she explained as she adjusted the drip rate. This should help with the dehydration. Rodriguez, what about pain management? Working on it. Their nervous system is more complex than ours. But there's a note here about using diluted morphine derivatives. Problem is we don't know exactly how diluted, best guess. 1/10 standard dose to start. We can increase if needed. As Elena prepared the injection, Zixtal tried to speak. His voice was still weak but clearer than before. Why are you doing this? Elena paused in her work. What do you mean? Your people have no obligation to help me. I am from an enemy force. We were fighting against human interests on Proxima Station just last month. Were you personally shooting at humans on Proxima Station? No, I was assigned to the Vegan front with my handler. We were tracking hegemony infiltrators through the asteroid fields. Elena resumed her injection preparation. Then we weren't enemies. We were just fighting different battles in the same war. Zhang looked over from his security station. Sarge, that's not how chain of command works. The Coalition brass made their priorities clear when they evacuated. The Coalition brass aren't here, Corporal. We are. Rodriguez looked up from his research. Found something interesting in the personnel files. Zixtal, it says here you have 17 confirmed saves of Coalition personnel during the war, including 2 human marine units on Kepler 186F. This surprised Zixtal. You have access to my service record? Basic summary, anyway. Says you were decorated for valor 3 times. Distinguished Service Cross Star of Merit and something called the Pack Leader's Honor. Rodriguez whistled softly. That last one's only given to warhounds who save the lives of their handlers. Elena administered the pain medication with practiced ease. Almost immediately, Zixtal felt some of the crushing agony in his chest begin to ease. My handler was young, inexperienced. I kept him alive for 2 years until he was transferred to a safer posting. What happened to your current handler? Elena asked gently. Lieutenant Vexmirin died in the bombardment. Shrapnel. Zixtal's voice carried a weight of grief that needed no translation. Elena was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. I'm sorry for your loss. This simple statement hit Zixtal harder than any of his physical injuries. In all his years of military service, through all the campaigns and battles and losses, no one had ever offered condolences for a fallen handler. Handlers died, new handlers were assigned, the war continued. It was simply how things worked. You knew him? He asked. No, but loss is loss regardless of species. Elena began cleaning one of the plasma burns on his flank. In human culture, we believe that grief is the price we pay for love. It sounds like you cared about your handlers. The young one, yes. Lieutenant Vexmirin was different, professional but kind. He would share his rations with me when supplies were short. He talked to me about his home, his family. Zixtal paused, struggling with emotions he'd never been allowed to express. Warhounds are not supposed to form attachments. We are bred for loyalty to duty, not to individuals. Sounds lonely, Rodriguez observed from across the room. It is the way things are, or were. Zixtal looked around at the 3 humans working to save his life. I do not understand your motivations. Zhang laughed, but not unkindly. Join the club? I've been trying to figure out the Sarge's motivations for 2 years now. Elena shot him a warning look, but there was humor in it. My motivations are simple, Corporal. See a problem? Fix the problem. Right now, you're the problem we need to fix. She moved to examine his broken leg, her hands careful and thorough. This is going to need to be set and stabilized. Rodriguez, did the database have anything about Catherian bone setting? Some. Their bones heal faster than ours but need more support during the process. There should be bone growth stimulators somewhere in this facility. Find them. Zhang, help me improvise a splint from whatever we can scavenge. As the humans continued their work, Zixtal found himself experiencing something entirely new. Not just gratitude for medical aid, but something deeper. These humans were risking their careers, possibly their lives, to save someone they had no obligation to help. More than that, they were treating him not as a weapon or a tool, but as a person worthy of care and respect. Elena, he said quietly. Yes? When we are finished here, when I am healed, what happens then? Elena paused in her examination of his injuries. I don't know. Honestly, I haven't thought that far ahead. First step is keeping you alive. We'll figure out the rest as we go. And if your superiors order you to abandon me as the coalition forces did, Elena met his gaze with steel in her eyes. Then I guess we'll have to make sure that doesn't happen. Zhang looked up from the supplies he was gathering. Sarge, you know that's borderline insubordination, right? Corporal, sometimes being a good soldier means being a good person first. If that's insubordination, I'll face the consequences. Rodriguez found the bone stimulators and brought them over. Never thought I'd be practicing veterinary medicine on an alien war dog. Xenobiology, Elena corrected. And he's not a dog. He's Zixtal. As the humans prepared to set his leg, Zixtal closed his eyes and tried to process this new reality. For the first time in his life, he was being treated not as military equipment, but as an individual worthy of salvation. It was a revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about the universe. 3 days had passed since Elena's team had found Zixtal, and the improvement in his condition was remarkable. The combination of proper hydration, pain management, and what Elena had started calling aggressive bedside manner had brought him back from the brink of death. His broken leg was properly set and showed early signs of healing. The plasma burns were clean and closing, and most importantly, his eyes had regained their alert intelligence. The abandoned facility had become an unlikely medical ward. Rodriguez had rigged up better lighting in the medical bay. Zhang had established a secure communication link with their transport ship, and Elena had somehow managed to synthesize basic nutrients compatible with Catherian physiology from the facility's emergency supplies, but their time was running out. Transport confirms pickup in 18 hours, Zhang announced, looking up from the communication console. Captain Hendricks wants a full inventory of salvageable materials ready for loading. Elena was checking Zixtal's leg splint, her movements careful and professional. And did you mention our additional passenger? About that, Sarge, Zhang's expression was uncomfortable. I may have omitted some details in my reports. Rodriguez looked up from his research terminal. Zhang, please tell me you didn't list him as salvageable equipment. I listed him as recovered coalition asset requiring medical evaluation. Elena raised an eyebrow. Creative. It bought us time, but when Captain Hendricks sees what we actually have, there's going to be questions. Lots of questions. Zixtel had been listening to this exchange with growing unease. Perhaps it would be better if I remained here. I can survive on the emergency supplies until another coalition ship arrives. No. Elena's response was immediate and firm. You're not staying behind again. We've come this far, we're going to finish what we started. But Elena, you do not understand the complications this will create for you and your team. Unauthorized rescue of enemy combatants is a serious military offense. You're not an enemy combatant, Rodriguez interjected. Technically, the coalition and human colonial forces were allied during the war. We just operated under separate command structures. A technicality that may not protect you from court-martial. Elena finished her examination and sat down where Zixtal could see her clearly. Let me tell you something about human military justice. We have a long tradition of insubordination when it serves the greater good. Some of our greatest heroes were soldiers who disobeyed orders to do what was right. And some of your greatest disasters came from the same impulse, Zhang pointed out. No offense, Sarge, but blind idealism isn't always the best policy. It's not blind idealism, it's calculated compassion. Elena's voice carried the weight of conviction. Think about what we've accomplished here. We've successfully provided emergency medical care to a completely alien species, using improvised techniques and limited supplies. Do you have any idea how valuable that knowledge could be? Rodriguez nodded slowly. She's got a point. The medical techniques we've developed here could revolutionize xenobiology. The fluid compatibility charts alone are worth a research grant. Plus, Elena continued, Zixtal has 17 confirmed saves of coalition personnel. He's a war hero. Abandoning a decorated veteran goes against everything the military is supposed to stand for. Zixtal was quiet for a long moment, processing their arguments. Finally, he spoke. You are willing to risk your careers for me. Why? Elena smiled. Because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's really that simple. But there must be something more. In my experience, no one makes sacrifices for strangers without expecting something in return. Zhang laughed. You've been hanging around the wrong species then. Humans have a reputation for doing stupid noble things for no good reason. It's not stupid, Elena protested. And there are good reasons. Zixtel, how much do you know about human history? Some, mostly military history from the war archives. Then you know we've been fighting among ourselves for thousands of years. Wars over territory, resources, ideology, religion. Sometimes we fought just because we looked different from each other. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. But every now and then someone would cross those lines to help an enemy. A soldier would share water with a wounded opponent. Or a medic would treat anyone who needed help regardless of which side they fought for. Rodriguez pulled up something on his terminal. There's a famous human story from one of our ancient wars. Soldiers on both sides stopped fighting on a religious holiday and played games together in the space between their battle lines. They shared food, showed pictures of their families, then went back to trying to kill each other the next day. That sounds insane, Zixtal observed. Absolutely, Elena agreed, but it's also what makes us human. We have this crazy ability to see past the immediate conflict to the person underneath. You're not just a warhound to us, you're Zixtal. You have a name, a history, feelings, losses. You've saved lives and been betrayed by people you trusted. That makes you more like us than different from us. Zhang's communication console chimed with an incoming message. He read it quickly, his expression growing grim. Sarge? We might have a problem. What kind of problem? Captain Hendricks is requesting detailed manifests of all recovered assets. Specifically, he wants to know about any biological materials we might have found. Elena and Rodriguez exchanged glances. How detailed? Elena asked. Species, condition, potential security threats. And he wants it in the next 6 hours. Zixtel struggled to sit up straighter despite the pain in his ribs. You see? Already the complications begin. You should leave me here with sufficient supplies and continue your mission. Not happening, Elena said firmly. Rodriguez, how mobile is he? Legs healing well with the stimulator, but he shouldn't be putting weight on it for at least another week. The internal injuries are mostly healed, but he'll need ongoing medical monitoring. Could he survive transport to our ship? Physically, yes. But Elena, even if we get him aboard, what then? The moment Captain Hendricks sees him, we're all facing disciplinary action. Elena was quiet for several minutes, her mind obviously working through possibilities. Finally, she looked up with the expression of grim determination. Then we don't let Captain Hendricks see him. Not immediately anyway. Zhang stared at her. Sarge, are you suggesting we smuggle him aboard our own ship? I'm suggesting we present this as a fait accompli rather than a request for permission. Sometimes it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. That's not just insubordination, that's mutiny, Zhang pointed out. Only if we're acting against the interests of the colonial forces. But we're not. We're presenting them with a unique opportunity for scientific advancement, intelligence gathering, and diplomatic relations with a former ally. Elena's voice gained confidence as she spoke. By the time we reach port, we'll have a full medical report on Cytherian physiology, a detailed account of coalition military practices, and proof that humans can successfully provide aid to alien species under field conditions. Rodriguez was nodding slowly. Turn it from a rescue operation into a research mission. Exactly. And if anyone questions our methods, we point out the results. Zixtel looked at each of the humans in turn. You are all insane, Elena grinned. Probably, you in? Despite everything, despite the pain and uncertainty and fear, Zixtel found himself making a sound he hadn't made in years. He was laughing. I suppose, he said. I have little choice but to trust in human insanity. Good, Elena said, standing and moving to the supply lockers. Because we have 18 hours to figure out how to hide a 4-foot-tall alien warhound on a military transport. This should be interesting. The plan that Elena's team devised over the next 12 hours was equal parts brilliant and desperate. Rodriguez had discovered that the transport ship's cargo bay included several large equipment containers that were scanned only externally during routine loading procedures. Zhang had managed to modify one of these containers with a portable life support system, emergency medical supplies, and a communication link to the main ship. But the most crucial element was Zixtal himself. The key, Elena explained as she helped him practice moving quietly despite his injuries, is that you're not hiding. You're being transported as classified research materials under medical quarantine protocols. And if someone demands to inspect the classified research materials, Zixtal asked, then Rodriguez becomes very technical very quickly about biological contamination procedures while Zhang quotes regulations about chain of custody for sensitive materials. Rodriguez looked up from his portable computer where he was crafting official-looking documentation. I've created a complete paper trail showing that we discovered biological samples requiring immediate laboratory analysis. Officially, we found tissue samples from an unknown species that might represent a new form of bioweapon. That's not technically a lie, Zhang observed. Zixtal is technically a bioweapon in a sense. I prefer enhanced biological combatant, Zixtal said dryly. His sense of humor had returned along with his strength, much to everyone's relief. Elena was repacking their medical supplies, making sure they had everything needed to continue his care during transport. The beauty of this approach is that it gives us scientific justification for everything we've done. We're not smuggling an alien aboard ship. We're preserving valuable research materials. And if the ruse fails, Zixtal asked, then we all face court-martial together, Elena said simply. But I'd rather be court-martialed for doing the right thing than commended for doing the wrong thing. The sound of approaching engines interrupted their preparations. Through the facility's windows, they could see the lights of the transport ship descending through the planet's thick atmosphere. Showtime, Zhang announced, checking his equipment one final time. Elena knelt beside Zixtal, her expression serious. Once we start this, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to trust us with your life? Zixtal considered the question. In the past week, these humans had shown him more kindness and respect than he'd experienced in years of military service. They'd risked their careers, their futures, their freedom to save someone they barely knew, simply because it was the right thing to do. Elena, he said quietly, 3 days ago I was prepared to die alone and forgotten on this facility. Because of you and your team, I am alive, healing, and about to embark on what is probably the most insane adventure of my life. If I must trust someone with my life, I can think of no better choice than humans who have already saved it once. Elena smiled and squeezed his shoulder gently. Then let's go steal a spaceship ride. The next hour was a masterpiece of military theater. Captain Hendricks was a weathered veteran who'd seen enough combat to be naturally suspicious, but Elena's team performed their deception flawlessly. Rodriguez presented his biological contamination reports with scientific authority. Zhang efficiently managed the loading of equipment with military precision, and Elena briefed the captain on their discoveries with calm professionalism. Biological samples, you say? Captain Hendricks examined the sealed container that held Zixtel with interest. Any idea what species they're from? Unknown at this time, sir, Rodriguez replied smoothly. The cellular structure is unlike anything in the database. We'll need full laboratory analysis to determine origin and potential applications. Could be a new form of coalition bioweapon, Elena added, or possibly hegemony research that was left behind during their retreat. Captain Hendricks nodded thoughtfully. Good work, Sergeant. Command has been asking for any intelligence on enemy biological research programs. This could be exactly what they're looking for. Inside his container, Zixtal listened to every word through the concealed communication link. He was impressed despite himself by the human's ability to spin truth into deception without technically lying. They were reporting exactly what they'd found, just not in the way anyone expected. The transport ship was larger than Zixtal had anticipated, with multiple cargo bays and research compartments. His container was placed in a restricted access laboratory where Rodriguez could continue his analysis without interference. The life support systems worked perfectly, and the communication link allowed him to stay in contact with the team throughout the journey. But 3 days into the voyage, their carefully constructed deception faced its first real test. Sergeant Martinez, Captain Hendricks announced over the ship's communication system, report to the laboratory immediately. Command wants a preliminary briefing on your biological findings. Elena's voice came through Zixtal's communicator, tense but controlled. We've got company coming, Zixtal. Stay quiet and trust the plan. Through the container's internal sensors, Zixtal could see Elena and Rodriguez preparing for what could be the end of their mission. Rodriguez was arranging genuine biological samples around the laboratory to create the impression of active research, while Elena reviewed the fabricated data reports they'd prepared. Captain Hendricks arrived with 2 other officers Zixtal didn't recognize. One wore the insignia of a medical corps colonel, the other appeared to be intelligence. What have you found, Sergeant? Captain Hendricks asked without preamble. Elena launched into a detailed explanation of their supposed discoveries, describing cellular structures and biological processes with impressive scientific accuracy. Rodriguez supported her with technical details and preliminary analysis reports. Fascinating, the medical colonel said, examining the false data. The protein structures you describe could represent a significant advancement in biological enhancement technology. Have you isolated any viable samples? This was the critical moment. Elena maintained perfect composure as she gestured toward Zixtal's container. We have several tissue samples in containment, but they require specialized environmental controls. The original specimens were severely degraded by plasma fire. I'd like to examine them personally, the intelligence officer said, stepping toward the container. Zixtal tensed, ready to surrender himself if necessary to protect the humans who'd saved him, but Elena smoothly intercepted the officer. Sir, with respect, the containment protocols are quite strict. We've documented several instances of cellular breakdown when samples are exposed to standard atmospheric conditions for more than 90 seconds. Until we can establish proper laboratory conditions, direct examination could destroy our only specimens. The intelligence officer paused, clearly torn between curiosity and caution. How long until you can prepare for safe examination? Rodriguez jumped in smoothly. Based on the cellular degradation rates we've observed, I estimate we'll need at least another week to develop proper preservation techniques. Rushing the process could contaminate the entire sample set. Captain Hendricks nodded approvingly. Good thinking. Command would rather wait for usable data than rush and lose everything. As the officers prepared to leave, The medical colonel turned back with one final question. Sergeant, in your professional opinion, what kind of biological enhancement are we looking at here? Elena looked directly at the container holding Zixtal as she answered. Sir, based on our preliminary findings, I believe we're looking at a life form specifically designed for survival under extreme conditions. Enhanced healing capabilities, redundant organ systems, adaptive camouflage, and most importantly, advanced cognitive functions that suggest true sentience rather than simple biological automation. The colonel whistled softly. If the coalition developed sentient bioweapons, that changes the entire strategic balance. Yes, sir, Elena agreed. It certainly does. After the officers left, Elena waited several minutes before activating the communication link. You okay in there? Zixtal's voice came through clearly, tinged with amazement. I am well. But Elena, what you said about sentience and cognitive enhancement, you were describing me exactly as I am, not as some hypothetical bioweapon. I was describing you as I see you, Elena replied. A sentient being with advanced capabilities who deserves the same respect and protection as any other person. Even if it means deceiving your superior officers? Elena was quiet for a moment. Zixtal, sometimes the greatest act of loyalty to your service is to help it become better than it currently is. We're not betraying the colonial forces by saving you. We're helping them evolve into the kind of organization that saves lives instead of abandoning them. Zixtal found himself once again marveling at human nature. They had taken enormous personal risks to save him, were continuing to risk everything to protect him, and somehow managed to frame it all as service to their military ideals. Your species, he said finally, is absolutely impossible to understand. Elena laughed. Welcome to being human, Zixtal. We don't understand ourselves half the time either. The transport ship arrived at Kepler Station 7 days later, and Zixtal had never felt more nervous in his life. Through his container's external sensors, he could see the massive orbital facility growing larger as they approached the docking bay. Kepler Station was the primary colonial forces research and medical facility in this sector, which meant their deception would face its ultimate test. Elena's voice came through the communicator, calm but tense. Final approach, Zixtal. How are you holding up? Physically much better. The bone stimulator has accelerated healing beyond what I thought possible. Emotionally, I am terrified. That makes two of us, Rodriguez's voice joined the conversation. Station Medical just transmitted their examination schedule. They want to begin analysis of our biological samples within 6 hours of docking. Zhang's voice crackled with anxiety. Sarge, there's no way we can maintain this charade once actual xenobiologists get involved. These people will know a living alien from tissue samples in about 30 seconds. Elena was quiet for several moments. When she spoke again, her voice carried a note of resolution that Zixtal had learned to recognize. Then we don't try to maintain the charade. We change the game entirely. What do you mean? Zixtal asked. I mean, we stop hiding and start advancing. Rodriguez, how complete is your medical documentation on Zixtal's treatment? Complete enough. I've recorded every procedure, every medication interaction, every vital sign reading. Why? Because we're about to present the Colonial Forces Medical Corps with the most comprehensive case study of alien emergency medicine in human history. Zhang sounded skeptical. By confessing that we've been smuggling a living alien aboard a military vessel? By demonstrating that we've successfully provided emergency medical care to a coalition ally using innovative techniques and limited resources. Elena's voice gained confidence as she outlined her plan. We march into that medical bay with Zixtal walking beside us, Rodriguez's complete medical files in hand, and we present them with a fait accompli wrapped in scientific opportunity. Zixtal tested his newly healed leg carefully. The bone stimulator had worked better than any of them had hoped, and while he was still weak from his original injuries, he was mobile and alert. Elna, this plan requires that the station medical staff react the same way you did when you found me. What if they don't? Then we face the consequences together. But Zixtal, you've been around humans for a week now. What's the one thing you've learned about us that might work in our favor? Zixtal considered the question seriously. You are curious. Almost compulsively so. When faced with something new, your first instinct is to study it rather than destroy it. Exactly. And you represent something completely new, a living example of successful human-alien medical cooperation, a chance to learn things that could save thousands of lives in future conflicts. Rodriguez sounded thoughtful. It could work. The potential scientific value is enormous, and if we present it as a research opportunity rather than a disciplinary issue, we might just pull this off. Zhang finished. Of course, we might also end up in military prison. Elena laughed. Zhang, we passed the point of no return a week ago. Now we're just deciding how spectacular our success or failure is going to be. The docking procedure took another hour, during which Zixtal's anxiety reached levels he hadn't experienced since his first combat deployment. Everything depended on the next few hours. Either Elena's faith in human curiosity would prove justified, or they would all face the consequences of their impossible rescue mission. Finally, the ship's intercoms announced successful docking and clearance for personnel transfer. Elena, Rodriguez, and Zhang came to the laboratory where Zixtal waited. Ready? Elena asked as she helped him out of the container. Zixtal stood carefully, testing his balance. The past week of medical care had restored much of his strength, and his natural healing abilities had accelerated under human treatment. He looked at the three humans who had saved his life and risked everything to protect him. I am ready, he said. But Elena, before we do this, I want you to know something. In my entire military career, through dozens of battles and campaigns, I have never served with anyone I trusted more than the three of you. Whatever happens next, that will not change. Elena smiled and touched his shoulder gently. The feeling is mutual, Zixtal. Now let's go make history. They walked through the ship's corridors together, an impossible sight that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. A human sergeant, a tech specialist, a young corporal, and a massive alien warhound moving with purpose toward an uncertain future. The station's medical bay was larger and more sophisticated than anything Zixtal had seen during the war. Banks of monitoring equipment, surgical suites, research laboratories, and what appeared to be an entire wing dedicated to biological analysis. Dr. Sarah Chen, the station's chief medical officer, was waiting for them with a team of researchers and technicians. She took one look at Zixtal and stopped dead in her tracks. Sergeant Martinez, she said slowly, please tell me that what I'm seeing is not what I think I'm seeing. Elena stepped forward, her posture confident and professional. Dr. Chen, I'd like to present the subject of our biological research. This is Zixtal, a Catherian warhound who was abandoned during the coalition evacuation of Kepler 442b. Over the past week, my team has successfully provided emergency medical treatment using adapted human medical techniques. Dr. Chen stared at Zixtal, then at Elena, then back at Zixtal. He's alive. Very much so, Zixtal confirmed, speaking in carefully accented galactic standard. And you've been treating him with human medical supplies? Rodriguez stepped forward with his data pad. Complete documentation is available, Doctor. Every procedure, every medication adaptation, every physiological response has been recorded. We've successfully treated multiple fractures, plasma burns, severe dehydration, and internal bleeding using improvised techniques. Dr. Chen seemed to be struggling with the situation. Do you have any idea what you've done? Elena tensed, preparing for the worst. Yes, Doctor. We've proven that human medical science can successfully treat alien physiology under field conditions. You've also, Dr. Chen continued, presented me with the greatest xenobiological research opportunity in human history. Her expression shifted from shock to fascination. A living, intelligent alien who's been successfully treated with human medical techniques. Do you understand the implications? One of the research technicians spoke up excitedly. Dr. Chen, if we can document the adaptations they made, we could revolutionize emergency medicine for interspecies cooperation. Another researcher was already scanning Zixtal with a handheld device. His bone density readings are incredible. And look at these cardiovascular measurements. He has redundant circulatory systems. Dr. Chen held up a hand for quiet, her medical instincts taking over. First things first. Zixtal, how do you feel? Much improved, Doctor. Sergeant Martinez and her team provided excellent care under difficult circumstances. And you're comfortable with us conducting medical examinations? We could learn things that might help other members of your species in the future. Zixtal looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. I am willing to participate in your research, Doctor. But I have one condition. What's that? Sergeant Martinez and her team remain involved in any research or treatment. They saved my life when their superiors would have left me to die. I trust them completely. Dr. Chen looked at Elena with new respect. Sergeant, it seems you've gained yourself a very loyal patient, also a very valuable research partner. She paused, studying the group carefully. I assume there will be some irregularities in how this situation came about? Elena straightened. Dr. Chen, we are prepared to face any disciplinary action resulting from our decisions. But we believed that saving a coalition ally and advancing human medical science was worth the risk. Dr. Chen smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Sergeant, in my experience, the best medical breakthroughs come from people who are willing to break a few rules for the greater good. I think we can find a way to frame this as a research opportunity, rather than a disciplinary issue. She turned to address her research team. Ladies and gentlemen, we have work to do. I want complete medical workups, tissue compatibility studies, and documentation of every technique these Marines use to save our guest's life. This is going to rewrite the textbook on xenobiology. As the medical team sprang into action around him, Zixtal felt something he'd never experienced before. He was being treated not as a weapon, not as equipment, not even as a patient, but as a partner in scientific discovery. And it was all because 3 humans had decided that saving a life was more important than following orders. Elena, he said quietly, as Dr. Chen began her preliminary examination. I think your faith in human curiosity may have been justified. Elena grinned.
Zixtal, we haven't even gotten to the interesting part yet.
2 weeks into his stay at Kepler Station, Zixtal had become something of a celebrity. Not just among the medical staff, who were fascinated by his physiology and recovery, but throughout the entire facility. Word had spread about the coalition warhound who'd been rescued by human Marines, and everyone wanted to meet him. Dr. Chen had been true to her word. What could have been a disciplinary nightmare had been transformed into the most successful interspecies medical research program in human history. Elena, Rodriguez, and Zhang had been reassigned as permanent liaisons to the Xenobiology Division, their field experience deemed invaluable for future rescue operations, but success brought new complications. Zixtal, Elena said, entering the medical bay where he was undergoing his daily physical therapy. We need to talk. He could tell from her tone that something was wrong. Over the past weeks, he'd become expert at reading human facial expressions and vocal patterns. Elena was worried about something. What has happened? Elena sat down beside his rehabilitation platform, her expression serious. Command has been getting inquiries about you. Specifically, the coalition government wants to know what happened to one of their missing warhounds. I see. And what has Command told them? Rodriguez, who had been monitoring Zixtal's healing progress, looked up from his readings. That's where it gets complicated. Officially, you're still listed as missing in action, presumed dead. But now that you're very much alive and recovering at a human medical facility, that status is going to have to change. Zhang entered the medical bay carrying a datapad and wearing an expression of grim concern. It gets worse. The coalition has formally requested your return for debriefing and reassignment. Apparently, warhounds are expensive to replace, and they want their property back. Zixtal felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injuries. Property. Yes, that is what I am to them. Elena's voice carried a dangerous edge. You're not property to us, Zixtal. You're a person, a friend, and more importantly, you're under the protection of the Colonial Forces Medical Corps as a research partner. Dr. Chen joined the group, carrying what appeared to be official documentation. I've been in communication with both commands about this situation. The good news is that our research has been so successful that the Colonial Forces wants to establish a permanent interspecies medical cooperation program. The bad news is that the Coalition considers Zixtal military equipment on loan to us. On loan? Zixtal asked. Technically, you're still considered an active-duty Coalition asset, which means they have the legal right to recall you at any time. Elena stood abruptly, pacing with the restless energy of someone looking for a fight. So after everything we've accomplished, after proving that interspecies cooperation can save lives, they want to treat Zixtal like a piece of equipment to be returned when convenient? Dr. Chen nodded grimly. The Coalition has made it clear that while they appreciate our research, Zixtal is too valuable as a military asset to remain permanently assigned to a human medical facility. Zixtal was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. He had known this moment would come eventually, but had hoped for more time. Time to learn, to grow, to experience what life could be like when treated as a person rather than a weapon. When? He asked simply. The Coalition transport arrives in 3 days, Zhang said quietly. And there's no legal way to prevent my return? Dr. Chen shook her head. Not under current interspecies military agreements. You're classified as Coalition military property, on temporary assignment for research purposes. Elena stopped pacing and fixed Dr. Chen with an intense stare. What if he wasn't Coalition military property anymore? What do you mean? What if Zixtal formally requested asylum with the colonial forces, or applied for citizenship, or simply refused to return to Coalition service? Rodriguez looked up from his medical readings. Elena, that's essentially asking him to defect from his own military. The political implications would be enormous. The personal implications are more important, Elena replied. Zixtal, what do you want? Not what the Coalition wants, not what Command wants, but what do you want? Zixtal had never been asked this question before. In his entire life, his wants and desires had never been considered relevant to any decision about his future. He was bred for service, trained for obedience, deployed where needed. The concept of personal choice was almost alien to him. I do not know, he admitted. Choice has never been part of my existence. Elena sat down facing him directly. Then let's start simple. Are you happy here? Yes, more than I have ever been. Do you want to continue our research partnership? Very much so. The work we are doing could help both our species. Do you want to return to Coalition military service? This question was harder. Zixtal thought about his life before the rescue. The endless campaigns, the succession of handlers who treated him as equipment, the isolation of being bred for loyalty but never allowed to form genuine connections. No, he said quietly. I do not want to return to that life, Elena nodded. Then we have our answer. The question is what we're going to do about it. Dr. Chen was studying her datapad intently. There might be a precedent for this. During the war, there were several cases of Coalition personnel requesting transfer to human units for specialized operations. The paperwork is complex, but it's possible. But I am not personnel, Zixtal pointed out. I am property. According to Coalition law, yes. But according to human law, any sentient being capable of making rational decisions has the right to self-determination. Rodriguez looked thoughtful. What if we could prove that Zixtal meets human legal standards for sentience and citizenship? Would that override Coalition property claims? It would certainly create an interesting legal challenge, Dr. Chen replied. And it would give us grounds to refuse the Coalition's repatriation request while the matter is being resolved in court. Elena was grinning now. The expression Zixtal had learned meant she was formulating another impossible plan. How long would a legal challenge like that take to resolve? Months, possibly years, given the interspecies legal complexity. And during that time, Zixtal would remain under colonial forces protection as a research partner? Presumably yes. Elena turned to Zixtal. It's not a perfect solution, but it would buy us time to figure out something more permanent. What do you think? Zixtal looked around at the humans who had saved his life, given him purpose, treated him with dignity and respect. 3 weeks ago, he had been a discarded weapon left to die on an abandoned facility. Now he was being offered the chance to choose his own future. I think, he said slowly, that if I am going to risk everything for an impossible plan, I cannot imagine better people to do it with. Zhang laughed. Another impossible rescue mission, then. This time, Elena said, we're not just rescuing Zixtal from abandonment. We're rescuing him from being property. Dr. Chen was already making notes on her datapad. I'll start the citizenship application process immediately. Rodriguez, I'll need your complete medical documentation to prove sentience and cognitive capacity. Zhang, can you access legal precedents for interspecies asylum cases? As his human friends sprang into action around him, Zixtal felt something he was beginning to recognize as hope, not just for his own future, but for what their success might mean for others like him throughout the galaxy. Elena, he said as she prepared to leave the medical bay, what you are attempting to do for me, it could change everything for warhounds throughout Coalition space. Elena paused at the doorway and smiled. Zixtal, that's exactly the point. Sometimes the greatest service you can perform for your military is to help it become something better than it was. And if we fail, Elena's smile turned into the fierce grin he'd learned to associate with her most dangerous moments. Then we'll fail while doing something worth failing for. Besides, since when do humans back down from impossible odds? As Elena left to begin what would undoubtedly be their most challenging mission yet, Zixtal settled back into his rehabilitation routine. But now, instead of simply healing his body, he was preparing for something far more ambitious. He was preparing to become free. 6 months later, Zixtal stood in a courtroom unlike anything he had ever imagined. The Interspecies Legal Tribunal on Earth was a massive chamber designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of different worlds and species. Humans sat alongside Centaurians, vegans, and even a few Catherian observers who had come to witness this unprecedented case. Elena sat in the front row, wearing her dress uniform with the new ribbons she'd received for her contributions to xenobiological research. Rodriguez and Zhang flanked her, both now holding advanced degrees in interspecies medicine thanks to their work with Zixtal. Dr. Chen sat with the legal team. Having been appointed as chief witness for the colonial forces argument, the case had attracted attention throughout the galaxy. Coalition versus colonial forces, with Zixtal's freedom hanging in the balance. But more than that, it was testing the fundamental question of whether a being bred for military service could choose their own destiny. This tribunal will now hear the case of Coalition Military Command versus Zixtal of Cathera regarding claims of citizenship and self-determination, announced Judge Harrison, a dignified human woman who had spent her career in interspecies law. The coalition's attorney, a stern vegan named Thexmar, stood to present their case first. Honored tribunal, this case is fundamentally about military property and contractual obligations. The being known as Zixtal was bred, trained, and deployed by coalition forces at enormous expense. To allow him to simply choose different allegiance would set a dangerous precedent that could undermine military discipline throughout the galaxy. Thexmar gestured to a holographic display showing Zixtal's military record. Warhounds are not civilian personnel. They are purpose-bred military assets, genetically enhanced and psychologically conditioned for specific military functions. Allowing such assets to choose their own assignments would be equivalent to allowing a starship to decide which fleet it belongs to. Zixtal felt a familiar chill at being described as military equipment, but Elena had prepared him for this. The coalition would argue that he was property, not a person. It was up to their legal team to prove otherwise. The human attorney representing Zixtal was Maria Santos, a specialist in artificial intelligence and android rights law. She stood with calm confidence as she began her opening statement. Honored tribunal, this case is about the most fundamental right of any sentient being, the right to determine their own destiny. The coalition would have you believe that genetic engineering and military training can strip away the essential qualities that make someone a person. We intend to prove that Zixtal possesses not only the cognitive capabilities that define sentience, but the moral agency that defines personhood. She gestured to Zixtal, who stood at the defendant's table with dignity despite his nervousness. Over the past 6 months, Zixtal has not only recovered from his injuries but has contributed to medical research that has saved lives throughout human space. He has formed friendships, made independent decisions, and demonstrated creativity and compassion far beyond any programming or conditioning. The first witness was Dr. Chen, who testified about Zixtal's medical recovery and his contributions to interspecies medical research. She described how he had voluntarily participated in studies, offered suggestions that had led to breakthrough treatments, and shown genuine concern for other patients in the medical facility. Dr. Chen, Attorney Santos asked, in your professional opinion, does Zixtal demonstrate the cognitive and emotional characteristics of a sentient being? Absolutely. His problem-solving abilities, emotional responses, and capacity for learning are indistinguishable from those of any human or other recognized sentient species. More importantly, he demonstrates moral reasoning and empathy that go well beyond simple programming. Rodriguez testified next, describing their field medical work and Zixtal's behavior during his recovery. He could have overpowered any of us at any time during his recovery, even while injured. Instead, he showed gratitude, humor, and genuine concern for our well-being. These aren't the responses of a programmed military asset. These are the responses of a friend. But the most powerful, Testimony came from an unexpected source. The coalition calls Captain Vex Miran to testify, announced Attorney I. Thexmar. Elena looked confused. Who's Captain Vex Miran? I thought Lieutenant Vex Miran was killed in the bombardment. Zhang did a quick search on his datapad. Captain Vex Miran is Lieutenant Vex Miran's father. He's a Coalition Warhound program administrator. Zixtal felt his heart's racing as an elderly Catherian in Coalition uniform approached the witness stand. This was the father of the only handler who had ever shown him genuine kindness. Captain Vex Miran, Attorney Thexmar began, you are familiar with the Warhound program and specifically with the defendant's service record? I am. And in your professional opinion, is the defendant capable of the kind of independent decision-making that would justify civilian legal status? Captain Vex Miran was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on Zixtal. Attorney Thexmar, I have spent 30 years working with warhounds. I have seen thousands of them bred, trained, deployed, and eventually retired or killed in service. He paused, his voice becoming softer. My son served as Zixtal's handler for 2 years before his death. In his personal communications to me, he frequently wrote about Zixtal's intelligence, loyalty, and what he described as unexpected humanity. Thexmar looked uncomfortable. Captain, the question is whether the defendant is capable of independent legal decisions, not whether he formed an emotional bond with his handler. I understand the question, Captain Vex Miran replied firmly, and my answer is based on 30 years of professional experience with warhounds and 2 years of personal reports from my son about this specific individual. He turned to address the tribunal directly. Warhounds are indeed bred and trained for military service. But Zixtal has demonstrated something that we never intended to engineer, the capacity for moral growth beyond his programming. My son wrote that Zixtal often questioned orders that might result in unnecessary casualties. He showed initiative in protecting civilian populations, even when it conflicted with direct military objectives. The courtroom was completely silent as Captain Vex Miran continued. If we have created beings capable of moral reasoning beyond their programming, then we have created people, not property, and people have the right to choose their own destinies. Attorney Thexmar tried to salvage the situation. Captain, surely you understand that allowing military assets to choose their own assignments would force us to treat them as the people they have become rather than the weapons we intended them to be. Captain Vex Miran interrupted. Perhaps that is exactly what we need to do. The trial continued for 3 more days, with experts testifying about sentience, consciousness, and the legal definitions of personhood. But Zixtal knew that Captain Vex Miran's testimony had been the turning point. When Judge Harrison finally announced the tribunal's decision, Zixtal felt Elena reach over and squeeze his paw gently. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, Judge Harrison announced, this tribunal finds that the being known as Zixtal possesses all the cognitive and moral characteristics necessary for recognition as a sentient person under interspecies law. Furthermore, we find that genetic engineering and military conditioning do not negate an individual's fundamental right to self-determination. The courtroom erupted in voices from dozens of different species, but Judge Harrison continued over the noise. Therefore, this tribunal grants Zixtal's application for Colonial Forces citizenship and formally recognizes his right to choose his own allegiance and life path. The coalition's claim of property ownership is hereby rejected. Zixtal felt Elena's arms around his neck as she hugged him tightly. Rodriguez and Zhang were cheering. Dr. Chen was applauding, and throughout the courtroom, beings from across the galaxy were witnessing the moment when military property became a free person. But the most meaningful moment came after the formal proceedings, when Captain Vex Miran approached Zixtal privately. My son would have been proud to see this day, the older Catherian said quietly. He always believed you were more than what you were created to be. Captain, Zixtal replied, your son saved my life long before the humans found me. He taught me that I could be something more than a weapon. I will honor his memory by living as the person he helped me become. 6 months later, Dr. Zixtal stood in the same medical bay where Elena had first treated his injuries. But now he wore the uniform of the Colonial Forces Medical Corps. His research into interspecies emergency medicine had already saved hundreds of lives, and his work was establishing the foundation for a new era of cooperation between species. Elena found him there, reviewing the latest research data from their field medical training program. Any regrets? She asked, settling into the chair beside his workstation. Sixtel considered the question seriously. Only one. I regret that it took abandonment and near death for me to discover what life could be like when someone sees you as a person rather than a weapon. Elena smiled. Well, if it's any consolation, you've already helped establish new protocols for warhound treatment throughout Coalition space. No one else will have to experience what you went through.